In the immortal words of the Wizard of Oz, when he said, the size of a person's heart is not determined by how much they love, but how much they are loved by others. And Mae Bday has that in spades. I want to you all for coming out 90 years. So what we wanted to do is, we had a few ideas. One was going to be sort of a trivia thing about her life and everything. We said, well, a lot of people aren't going to know this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little interview about some of the really interesting, fun things about Mae's life. And, you know, we've got 9 decades here, and it's been really fantastic. She's been a real trendsetter and ahead of her time her entire life. And we're going to sit down, we're going to talk a little bit about it, and then if you guys have any questions, you can ask too, but this should be fun. So, you were born in 1928. And Vanessa and I were talking to you last week, and we were just wondering, what are some of your earliest memories? You were born in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, that's right. Brooklyn, that's in New York. What do you want to know?
You grew up there. What were you actually have never said anything to me about your childhood.
When I was in the crib, my brothers set fire underneath the crib.
Were they trying to get rid of you, or was it an accident?
I think they thought I was cold.
Okay. So you went to grade school. Do you remember much from the 30s? As you were growing up, and the Depression hit in 1929, we were just wondering a bit about how your life was as a child there.
Well, I went to school in Long Island, New York, and I was in one of the first schools that taught progressive education. I don't know, some of you older people that are in the educational field might remember what that was. But one of the things that you did was not to learn syllables, and you didn't really learn how to spell, which is the way it is with me. They did something to that program because they turned out terrible spellers. And I can't, well, the school, though, was very progressive. We taught things that you would be doing in life, and I've forgotten most of them.
So, okay, so you were through the 30s, and you were in grade school, you were this, and then when you became more of a teen, you were in high school in the 40s during World War II. Your brothers were both at war. I didn't realize when Valerie was mentioning this to me, but you were quite an athlete.
Yeah, I played basketball and softball in high school. And you know, I've got a high school buddy here. Her name is Doris Sullivan.
When did she move to Attleboro?
Where is she?
When did you move to
When did you
Attleboro?
move to Attleboro?
In 1937. It was right after the Depression. My father was the manager of the Knickerbocker Ice Company. That was also in New York, but he had the one that was in Attleboro. And yeah, I had a wonderful time. We lived directly across from a funeral parlor, and I used to watch all the funerals. They were great.
I remember growing up that there might have been an old violin in the case somewhere. Did you play the violin? Yeah.
I played the violin all through grammar school when they gave me this violin. And I played in high school. And in my yearbook, they said that I was going to leave with the squeak.
Well, at least it instilled a love of classical music in you, because you certainly became a huge fan of the symphony for years and years and years and years. So they appreciate it, and that's what's great about learning music, whether you're a great violinist or not. Okay, so some little curious. So you did these athletics when you were in high school. You were a normal high school kid. You did music. When you got out of high school, did you start working immediately or go to trade school, or what did you do?
I went to Swank Men's Jewelry as what they call a copy designer, which other people did designing, and I drew it, and it was manufactured. And if you had a piece of design that went into the solid, or not, the 18 karat gold line, it was really something. It was like getting an award. And I did that. They looked like knots. I don't know whether anyone has ever remembered seeing them, but they had money clips, cufflinks, tie clips, and they all had knots on them. And they liked the way that they were done. But when I got out of high school, I went into the YMCA Industrial League as a basketball player. But I was also in the company I worked for later on by the name of Foxborough Company. They were an instrumentation company. That I was on their softball team. And we got real good. We were beating everybody. So they had us join the New England Industrial League. And I played left field. And we got so good, we were in the competition for the New England Championship. So we asked the Foxborough Company, being they had a very good men's softball team, if they would buy us uniforms. And you know what women were in those days? Well, they weren't going to buy us any uniforms. So we all got together and said, okay, let's all go as hobos. And we represented that very fine company as hobos. I think eventually they gave us uniforms. I probably left it.
Good for you.
So you worked for Foxborough, and at some point in this period of time, you went to the Rhode Island School of Design.
Oh, yeah. I went to Rhode Island School of Design when I was working for Swank. And I went to night school. And I also went to the University of Rhode Island at that time. And that's about the time I came to Florida. But the time I spent going to school at Rhode Island School of Design was fabulous. I not only took drawing and drafting, but I took pottery. And the pottery making was a college credit thing. And the man and woman who taught this were the only ones that had received a doctorate in pottery making and sculpturing. It was quite a thing. With the 5 kids that I had, none of that stuff is left. I brought some down here.
Okay, now I'm really sort of interested in knowing this, because I don't know, but because I think this is rather extraordinary, but somehow as a young single woman, you decided to up and move from Massachusetts to come down to Florida for the aerospace space program. And I never really, maybe you could tell us, like, how did that happen? How did they find you? How did they find you?
Well, I worked in a department of maybe 20 male draftsmen, and they saw this ad in the paper, and you had to go to Boston to interview. Well, either they were afraid to go, didn't want to leave the company, or some reason his wife's, probably the wives didn't want him to leave. I said, well, I'll go and I'll find out what it's all about. So I did, and the man that interviewed me, Hal Storrs, his name was, got all the information from me and turned it over to my boss that would be my boss in Florida. And in 3 months, he was my husband. And I'm loving
Another
him.
clap.
I was real glad.
Okay, you're not getting off that easy. Evidently, when she came down and started with RCA, as far as when I read it was part of the Aflac computer group at the beginning.
It was called FLAC.
Not
Florida Automatic Computer. The second major computer built in the country. The first one was in Philadelphia. Maybe some of you guys remember what that was called. I don't remember that. But it was very powerful, and it was built by 4 or 5 guys that started Saravon over near Harris. But the Air Force sort of took it over, and they left. I don't know why, but they left and started their own company. But when I was hired, the word flag meant something from bombs. And I couldn't imagine what I was getting into. But when I got down here, Jack explained to me that drawings had to be made. And you know, these terms that they had for computers back then, you don't even know of now. It's amazing. I have lived from the beginning of the computer age, and it's been a hell of a ride.
You came down, you started working for RCA, and Jack was your boss. And he started expressing some interest in you, and RCA had a policy that you weren't supposed to date people in the company. So you guys were kind of sneaking around from the story goes. And I remember you telling me when Jack was kind of interested in you, he was sort of checking you out. He said, "So, Mae, how do you make a meatloaf?" To which you answered,
Really?
I love that one. So, yeah, so I guess they were sneaking off and going to various places on the fringe of town so not to be discovered, but you got busted at the Alamo restaurant on US 1. So anyway, you guys ended up married, and Jack had 2 daughters, Christine and Tanya, already, our stepsisters. And you were, how did that, you went instantly from being single to being a mom with 2 kids?
Scared to death. Angry at times. I was the stepmother that they really didn't want because they were still pretty involved with their mother. And I got involved with her. She stayed with us several times. And, you know, it seemed to be a likable situation until Christine ran away to live with her mother. And, oh, what did I get myself into? But it all ended out pretty well. Tanya and Christine really appreciated me after about 7 years.
Only 10?
They were almost married when they did that.
Okay, there's a couple of little stories here when we sort of get into the 1960s here. You had me in 1957, and Ann 2 years later, and I guess Valerie in 60? 62. 62, okay. So now you've got a whole nother batch of kids, and you were doing that, raising young. Now, one of my favorite stories, and I don't know if you folks have heard this before, but you remember a rather pivotal event that happened in the history of the world called the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, she's got a great story, and I love this one, so I'm going to let her tell you this.
Well, I worked for Foreign Technology, and we knew all about what was happening in Cuba. And it was getting real serious, and we weren't allowed to even talk to our families about this. So I came home, and I didn't even want to tell Jack until very late. But I said, we've got to get someone ready up north to take the kids and take care of them in case something terrible happens. So I mentioned Doris and John Sullivan, my old childhood friend. I said to Doris, I said, I'm sending the kids up to visit, and I can't tell you why. And so she accepted them, but we never had to really send them because you know how things turned out, those that were around here at that time. And everything worked out well. But I worked in the Foreign Technology Unit as we were the sort of spy unit from the Russian launch complex in Russia. And I would have an analyst stand with me and tell me what to draw so that a person could visualize what the complexes that they launched their missiles from. They didn't launch them like we launch ours. They were a lot different. But we did notice that in all the photographs, we were never allowed to tell anybody this, but now it doesn't matter. The missiles would explode all over the place. Oh, and so they really weren't, in the beginning, very successful. We had explosions, but not like they did. So that was an exciting period in my life.
Okay, another one that was very interesting is during the early 60s, during the civil rights movements, there were some marches locally, and one of our neighbors, Bob Jonke was arrested for marching in the Civil Rights March and put in jail, to which he requested that you come and visit him with a plan in mind.
So the plan was that when I got there, he was going to give me a letter of details to his civil rights lawyer. And you know, there's cameras all over the place. So he gave me this couple of pages, and I tucked them in my bra. And left, but I was sure I was going to be stopped somewhere by some deputy. And so I got out and left, and I did manage to get to his civil rights lawyer. And but after that, they were going to let him out of jail, but they were escorting him to where his car had been tipped over by people. And eventually he got it up, and when he left town, he was escorted by the deputies. This was quite a time in that period of Brevard. And so he left town, and he did call us when he got to New York to say that he was safe. So meeting Bob Jonke, he was the first protester I had ever met.
I just love this top secret artist analyst, Cuban Missile Crisis, smuggling papers out of jails in her bra. Never as a kid. If she had told me that, I would have done anything she said. Yeah. Okay, I think another thing we're getting sort of through the 60s and on is the Indian River Players became Melbourne Civic Theater, and theater was a big part of your life, and us growing up, we were always, you brought us down there, and we were crawling around on the floor and playing around backstage. So maybe just tell everybody a little bit, and I know there are people that were in the theater here today, how you got into it.
My boss in RCA came up to me and he knew I was an artist and he says, "You're coming down to the theater. I want you to do some artwork on some flags." Well, he's my boss, so I did. And I really hardly ever left the place after that. In fact, I still know him. I thought he was going to be here today, but he wasn't.
What's his name?
Charlie Scott. He was the head. Anybody know him?
Oh, no.
No.
Yes, a few people do.
Oh, good. He worked in the theater. I think he was even president of IRP for a while. But there's a few people here that follow. I work tech most of the time. But Bobby Snow came down one day. She's here.
Right here, she is.
And she said, "Let me do something." So I had her painting bricks. And she never let me forget.
And they were all
And-
crooked.
And you know,
she
there's
just
a
raised
little
them.
incident in a show that I thought was hilarious. The other day I mentioned the name of that show. You know,
Blind Spirit.
no, it wasn't Blind Spirit. But it was about a young man, and it was all about his life. And David always has a real hard time getting an actor who doesn't have to say anything or is just in the play. And so he asked me if I would be the mother who dies right after the show opens. But it turns out that David was the father. And do you remember this, David?
It wasn't Tom Jones, was
Tom Jones. Tom Jones.
Yeah.
And anyway, David and I are out on the stage right as the curtain opens. And I'm holding this baby. Like this. And David is beside me. Well, the cast and crew thought it would be a neat trick to have one of these dolls that you pull the string. So David's standing beside me, he goes, and I let go of the string. And he grabs, this is opening night, he grabs the face of the baby. And when we got on stage, he says, "Don't you ever do that."
he? He didn't want to
Do
be
you
on
remember
stage.
that? I want to be on stage. Do you?
No.
Oh, I can't forget it. And the theater is really such a large part of my life.
Hey, hold it
The
closer.
theater is such a large part of my life. I design sets, and I was in a couple of shows, but one of them was Blind Spirit, and David had a hard time finding a maid. So I was the stage manager, and I was sitting behind the flats, and it was my cue, and I sort of didn't catch it. So someone said, "Get out on stage." And I ran out there with my tray of tea to serve the mistress of the house. And I went around the front of the couch and I moved the audience. Moved. And it was funny because I only did that one night, but boy, I never, for a lot of people, never lived it down. Okay, that's about the theater business. I still go. And by the way, Melbourne Civic Theater puts on, that's what the name is now, by the way, puts on some of the greatest productions for an audience of about 72 people.
I think it's 92.
92 people. And they're great. And I always manage, because of their stage manager, their house manager, to get a front row seat, because I like to hear. But they have play readings, I think 6 a year. And Terry Gerard, who's sitting over here somewhere there, are constant members of this play reading group. In fact, Terry is the director. I recommend any of these things. They're cheap. The play readings are cheap, and the money goes to lighting or something like that. So, but I owe a lot of my life to the Indian River and MCT group. And, I'm looking here at Reed. I said, what was it that I was so involved with him? And it's the sommeliers of Orlando. And Jack did a couple of wine trips with Reed and his group. And what a wine tours we had. And, we'd go 9 o'clock in the morning to a winery, and they'd have 18 wine glasses set up for us to taste at that time of the morning. So,
Great way to have breakfast.
yeah. Right. Yeah. So the wine group in Orlando was mostly Jack's love, and I went along with him, and I got some great trips out of it. So, anything else?
A few things I just wanted to mention. Some special questions to ask you that'll be fun. You were a band parent for 8 years. As you mentioned before, I was in all of us three kids, Valerie Ann and me, were in Melbourne High School band. And she went on all the trips, the contests, the everything. She was one of the most respected and beloved chaperones, and a big supporter of the music program there, which has been fabulous over the years. I think another thing, was in my growing up is we did a lot of sailing, and that was a huge part of our lives, really sailing. We had a sailboat, and you were involved in Jack, and I remember the one story we'll get and we'll move on is we were all going down to do a camping trip on one of the dredge islands down sort of by Grant.
Let's say the Polish Navy.
The Polish Navy. The boat had originally been called something like the Roseanne, and then after a series of calamities and things that went on with this boat over the years, it got nicknamed the Polish Navy, and then T-shirts got made and flags, and it turned into a thing.
Made in Poland on one side of the boat, M-A-I-D, and on the other side of the boat it said M-A-D-E. Did I spell it right, considering my effort?
Tell them about the fan mail too.
Do you want me to
Tell the story about the tornado.
Okay. We were coming down the river and it looked terrible. The weather was coming in on us. So we went to one of the little islands and anchored. A bow anchor. And we're sitting there, and honestly, I didn't feel much, but I said to Jack, the island went by twice. And that storm, it was a water spout, and it had picked us up, spun us around, and then turned us over. We had in the cabin a mother with her son, a poodle.
Toby.
Huh?
Tangerine.
Toby. No, Toby.
Toby.
And how many were on board?
Me and John Sullivan, Toby. There's a lot of them.
Anyway, they were all in the cabin, everybody was thrown out of the boat. So the dog was thrown out of the cabin, I believe, and the mast was on its side, and there is the dog holding on to it. It was really something to see, but we got rescued by another boat, and we called that the Polish Navy. I mean the Italian Navy.
The boat's called the Salerno.
Oh, the Salerno. And he was one of the managers at Harris. And I know that he got us to the island and the boat was towed. But when we got to the island, we mentioned there was a case of wine in the boat. So he went back with his crew and they found the case of wine and brought it down.
Okay, I was involved in this as well. And if you guys remember, do you guys remember a guy named Saul Becker? Saul Becker had bought a boat and he was pretty green about running it. He didn't have a lot of experience, a sailboat, but he wanted to sail. And I had been on the sailboat since I was an infant. They used to tie a rope around me. And Dad had taught me to sail, and Chuck Griffith and Bill Green, and I know how to sail a boat. So Saul Becker, his storm hits, and he freaks out and goes inside the boat, and I'm like 15 or something, and I'm like, what? He goes, you sail it. I'm like, okay. So it's this horrible storm, and I'm going down, and the squall goes by, and I'm sailing along, and Saul Becker comes out, and I see my father's pipe go floating by, and his hat, and the cooler, and I was like, this can't be good. And sure enough, we got there, and here's the boat over on its side, but I remember seeing his smoking pipe go floating by. So anyway, that was a big, huge part of our lives, and I think that gets us through almost to the 80s, and you've still been working at RCA for years. Dad was at Harris, and then you guys sort of got into retirement, and you traveled a lot, right?
Oh, yeah.
France,
Belize,
they went on a great trip,
Caribbean.
the Caribbean, all over, and a great love of travel internationally, and also you guys are a lot into canoeing and camping.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We had a group, Chuck Griffiths and his family, and Mary Ellen York.
And Lynn York.
And Lynn York. We all loved to canoe. And Priscilla and Chuck had on their wall a map of Florida and a red line or some colored line with every river that we had canoed. And I wanted so badly when Priscilla's house got sold to have that map, but nobody knows what happened to it. And so we really don't know all the rivers, but I swear, way up to the Panhandle, all the way down to
Loxahatchee.
And one of the favorite places was Olena. Olena State Park.
State Park, yeah.
So-
Old Springs.
I'll tell you, people, see Florida before it goes down the drain. Literally.
So I think we're going to end here with this part because most of the people here have known you since then and know what you've been up to. I was more trying to get some of the older stuff that maybe people weren't familiar. So to end this up, I would like to, when I was joking about doing the Live at the Actors Studio, at the end of that show, James Lipton used to always do this thing called the Pivo Questionnaire. I don't know if you remember that show. He would have actors and directors on, and he would ask them questions about their career. I know you've seen it.
You've seen it.
You've seen it.
You'll
So
remember
there's a series of 10 questions that you're supposed to answer very spontaneously, And this is the people questionnaire, so I'm going to give you this. The first question is, what is your favorite word?
Excuse me, everybody. Oh, shit.
Good question. Okay. What is your least favorite word?
Oh, shit.
Okay. All right. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, and emotionally?
My love of friends. I really think that covers family and all my life.
That's good.
Okay. What turns you off?
Politics.
Now you see, you already ruined this. What is your favorite curse word?
I'll
think of another one.
No, I really can't.
No, that's the one.
That's the one. That's the one it is. Remember, the first time in the history of this questionnaire is 3 answers all been for the same. What sound or noise do you love?
Music.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Music.
Have you taken your pills today?
Yeah, I have a little gadget that at 2 times during the day it says, it's time to take your pills. And then soon after that, Valerie calls. Have you taken your pills yet?
And yet, sometimes she still doesn't do it.
She just hasn't got around to it yet.
Word, no.
No, that's
That's
it.
it.
You answered it. Okay. The next question is, what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, it would be in the theater, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure that I could be a director.
What profession would you absolutely not want to do?
Politician.
Okay. And number 10, when you get to heaven and you bump into God, what would you like him to say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Thank you, God, so much. Thank you, thank you.
And that's it. Happy birthday, Mae. I thank you guys all for working so much. 90 years. You believe it? Yeah, let's give her a hand. Boom, the festivities.